The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this episode are that of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the values of sponsors or other associated organizations. Welcome to the Parental Compass by Family Education and Support Services. I'm your host, Bobby Williams. Please subscribe to the show, whatever platform you're listening on. Subscribe. We'll notify you every week when the next episode drops. Plus, we have a ton of great back episodes. As a young person growing up in society, it can be tough to be your true, authentic self. There's so many pressures. My guest today has put a lot of thought into this issue. She is the author of several children's books, including the bestseller, I Love My Hair. Natasha Tarpley. A running theme through Natasha's work is connecting with your true self. So I just knew she'd be the perfect person to talk to about this. Check it out. So I heard your mom was actually an author. Is that true?
She was an aspiring author. And, she kind of encouraged me to write, but also was like a model for me to write. Because when we were little, I'm the oldest of 4 kids. And so when we were little, my mom was always writing these little stories about the things that we did or that we were interested in, or, things that she thought would be helpful for us to know growing up. And so I would see her, back then it was like a big clunky electric typewriter that she would take out and go sit in the sunroom. And we had a little sunroom in our house, and she would go out there and write. And I would just watch it and see the process and see the result. And it was something that really stuck with me for, it kind of influenced me as a young person. And then when I started writing myself, she became, pretty much my biggest champion and still is to this day. And one of the exciting circles that's happened is that she too has gone back to an earlier manuscript that she started writing when we were kids and is now kind of revisiting that. So it's exciting that she's picking that back up again.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like she inspired you and now you're inspiring her.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think for children too, it's like you always want to feel special. I mean, everyone wants to feel special, but as a kid, you want to feel special. And that'd be so validating to have your parent writing a story about specifically you.
Yes, it definitely was. And it was particularly important looking back on it because, there weren't a lot of books that were about Black children, when we were growing up. There's still a need for more diverse books as we're having that kind of conversation in the publishing industry as well as other, industries. So looking back on it, it was a moment where, we were the center of the story, my siblings and I, as, African American children, although that wasn't the main focus of the stories, but it now, has that other layer as I write myself with that mission in mind.
Yeah. Well, I have your book here. I Love My Hair. What inspired this book? Or, I mean, your mom was a big piece of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this was going back to this whole idea of the creativity and the excitement around creating stories that was cultivated by my mom and also by my dad. We had a lot of books in our house. Both of my parents read to us when we were children, and so I love my hair was inspired actually by my own experiences getting my hair combed and really not enjoying it. And one of the things my mom used to do was we would make up these little stories as she went around and combed my hair. So we'd have all these characters that we visit and make up stories, which really made the process, more fun. And when I started, this was my first book for children. I love my hair. And when I thought about what I wanted to write, I thought about that moment. And this book to me, it's not so much about hair as it is about the sense of joy and wonder that comes from you kind of like exploring who you are, accepting who you are, and celebrating who you are and your natural beauty and your own creativity and imagination, because this character in the story, makes up all kinds of images. She has all kinds of images and ideas about her hair that are coming from her own kind of imagination and creativity.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so challenging to be your authentic self, or you want your child to be their authentic selves. But there's so many influences, like you're talking about representation in media, and media has a huge impact on kids because it's a lot of what they're subjected to, or they
Right.
feel. Mhm.
It is. It's I actually don't have children myself, but I'm very close to my niece and nephew. I've been a part of their lives and been very fortunate to be a part of their lives. And I see that process happening. So I think as someone who works with children, as someone who's been involved in children's lives, I feel like the best you can do is to offer them, these spaces of exploration, of affirmation. And yes, there's a lot going on in the world, and to be very open about talking about some of those things and dismantling some of the things that they may be hearing and experiencing. And sometimes it doesn't feel like, you can't see the immediate results of that, because there's a lot of peer pressure. There's a lot of questioning that still happens as part of, your natural development process. But I have seen how those things stay with children. The
Mhm.
things that you offer them and give them, they stay with them. So even if you don't see the immediate impact of that, just know that it's there in the fabric of who they are.
I host songwriting workshops with kids who have had challenging lives, like often they've been through trauma,
Mhm.
and we're trying to get them to create authentic art. And the reason we can get them to that place is creating an environment of acceptance, and everyone has to buy into that or it's not going to work.
Right.
But you see the transformation in them when it's like, okay, it's all right if you have some tick that you go into, or you're
Yes,
especially shy, like that's okay. And then when they can feel accepted, you see them start to open up and stand up a little taller and sing a little louder and things like that.
absolutely.
Were there ways that your mom helped you to be an authentic person growing up?
So I was a shy kid, and I guess it took a while to kind of, for me and within myself, to kind of get to that point where I felt a little bit more confident and all of that. But I think it's going back to the things that you just said, the things that I was talking about with my niece and nephew, just that environment of acceptance is, so important. We were so lucky that our parents didn't, of course we had structure in our lives, but our parents didn't really impose so much of what they felt like we should or should not be doing in terms of our interests. I mean, of course we had rules in our household and all of that, but my mom allowed me to read as much as I wanted. You know, I could read whatever I wanted. I went through a crazy punk rock phase where I was, dressing
Cool.
all kinds of crazy ways and dyeing my hair and, all the things, associated with that. And, I was like bombarding her with hardcore music. And, I went through a Smiths phase where I was just like, oh, meat is murder. Yeah, all this stuff.
That's
And
sweet.
so, yeah. But she allowed, she made a space where that was acceptable, where it was okay, you want to do it, okay, as long as you're not hurting yourself. I don't want to hear it, but go
Yeah.
for it. So that kind of acceptance and permissiveness to a certain extent, to a certain extent, I think really helped or really cultivated that.
Well, and that's how you discover yourself, is trying things out. And
Yeah.
um, tell me a little bit about the me I chose to be.
So this book started, probably just before the pandemic hit. So it was this idea of writing a book, and it was actually a collaboration that I was asked to do by my publisher. There was the photographers who are the illustrators of the book are they're very talented photography duo, Karin and Regis Bethencourt, who are also known as Creative Soul, and they do these just elaborate and exquisite portraits of Black children, which is what their work is. And so my publisher thought about me and them, and they're like, "Hey, you guys do something together." And so we went back and forth, and we came up with this idea of writing a book about, just the power, not so much, I think a lot of books about children of color, especially Black children, focus on these things that everyone has always said are not good about you, or that that are problematic, like your hair, your skin, all of these things that society has built these narratives around as far as Black children and Black people. And rather than, kind of confront that, I mean, I did that with I Love My Hair to some extent, but it's a bigger question to me. It's not so much about, I'm going to accept my hair or I'm going to whatever. It's always like, if you take that path, if you take that perspective, in my opinion, you're always going to be kind of referencing yourself in relation to something else, some other ideal or
Mhm.
some other image that, someone has said is this is like our idea of beauty, or this is our societal idea of who's valuable and whatnot. So for me, I really wanted to take that to really focus on the internal space of children's kind of self-exploration and that whole power, and really reinforce the power that we all have within us to kind of define who and what we want to be. And so that's really where that came from. And then when the pandemic hit, it had another layer, because I think once we went through the pandemic and George Floyd, we had all of this societal messaging around race and racism and violence. And on some levels, yes, it's good. We're bringing this out, but on the other level, I think it's still kind of, in some ways, can constrict the imagination and the experiences of those children of color who are sort of on the receiving end, whether benevolent or not, of this discussion of like, oh, well, we only want to talk to you about your experience with race, or we
Mhm.
want to talk to you about how you feel about racism, or how we should feel about you. I'm like, no, these are kids need to have a sense of possibility. They need to have a sense of being anchored not out externally or defined externally, but how do you locate that power within yourself? Because once you kind of, and I'm sorry to be rambling,
No, go
but
ahead.
once you locate that center of power, and once you claim that sense of like, I'm going to make these decisions about myself, then I think you can approach the external world from a stronger position, from a stance of strength and confidence, and say, no, maybe I'll have this conversation with you, but I'm not going to be defined by it. And I'm going to bring something else to the table, so I'm not going to be in this position where I'm always kind of on the receiving end of how you define this situation and who to be and who I am.
Yeah. It's like I am a complete person with many
Yes.
facets. And mhm.
Yeah.
I was thinking a little bit as you're talking about how when you're young, you have all this time to really think about things. Like as an adult, we don't have the same amount of time to just sort of process. But as a kid, there's a lot of idle time. And the pandemic kind of gave everyone a little taste of that some, but
Yeah.
it's just a real difference of adulthood.
Yeah. And I think I think on some levels as a kid, you're always thinking about things in a certain way, and you're trying to figure out how you relate, how you yourself relates to so many things that you're learning about as you develop and grow. Um, and I think adults, we lose that, but we're still in that process. We never just stop and that's it. And I feel like a book like The Me I Choose to Be is not just for children, it's or any of the books that I write. I feel like they're for adults too, to kind of reconnect to that sense of wonder and also that power, because we too are defined so often by the way society, kind of expects us to behave, the little boxes that we are put into in our lives. And I think we all need to kind of be connected to that source of power that's within us.
Yeah. Well, there's so many pressures of adults and
Yeah,
pay the bills and act this way around
yeah.
this, or what's helping to keep you authentic as an adult in the midst of all this pressure of adulthood?
I think my work is a very important part of that, because I'm always in that process of exploration, and I'm a very curious person by nature, and I'm fortunate to have work that sustains that and requires it in a lot of ways. I mean, if I'm going to write something, I'm going to have to know about it. I'm going to have to explore the things that I'm writing about and the ideas that I'm able to come up with. I just kind of take an open, like I'm very open to the world. So I'm always listening to things. I get on the treadmill and I turn on NPR and I'm just listening to all these stories, and I'm just always looking at the world with a sense of like, what am I going to discover today, or what am I going to learn today? And of course I have days where I'm just not that way, but I think my work has really enabled me to keep that sense of curiosity and discovery alive.
What kind of message would you like to leave parents with when they're thinking about their children and helping their children to be their authentic selves?
I think just reinforcing the things that we've talked about in this discussion, just kind of trying to create environments where your kids have the freedom to explore, to have more open lines of communication about the things that may be going on in the world, but also the things that they're interested in, and being able to kind of cultivate that. My mom made us do so many different things when we were kids, and we didn't like all of them, but those things, again, as I was saying earlier, they stick with you. And you never know, you could be in a room with someone. Like for example, I took ballet lessons and I hated them, but talking about ballet lessons with someone in a room, opened up another conversation that led to, you know, a point of connection, so you never know where the things that you put into your child are how they're going to blossom or manifest in your child's development, and not worrying so much about, oh, my kid isn't doing this and my kid isn't doing that, or you know, I think just that level of acceptance. Again, I'm not a parent, but I can appreciate how difficult it is when you're concerned about a child. But just trying to cultivate that level of acceptance within yourself and offer that to your child as well.
Well, this was an awesome conversation. How can the audience keep in touch with you and your projects?
You can visit my website at Natasha Tarpley Writes, WRITES.com. And I'm also on Instagram under my name at Natasha Tarpley.
Well, Natasha, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Bobby, for having me. I enjoyed it.
Wishing you continued success, Natasha. Thank you for taking the time to come on the show. This has been the Parental Compass by Family Education and Support Services. I'm Bobby Williams. We'll see you next week. Peace.